Hi everybody, today I want to talk about assisted opening knives, what they are, how they compare to manual knives, benefits and drawbacks of each, and for the purposes of this video I'm going to be focusing on these two knives. The USA made subframe lock Kershaw Knockout and the USA made subframe lock Kershaw Bare Knuckle. The Knockout is an assisted opening knife and the Bare Knuckle is a manual. These knives both have a huge amount in common, which is why I'll be using them for this video. And this here, if I can manage to not disassemble it as I bring it onto camera, is a Kershaw Pico. There we go. Which is another assisted opening Kershaw, which is disassembled at the moment. Its scale's taken off the outside, and I'm going to hopefully be able to use this to show you what's going on inside an assisted opening knife. Now, since I'm going to be using this Pico and this Knockout for most of this video, I'm going to be talking about Kershaw's Speedsafe Assist. Now, most assisted opening knives work very similarly to Kershaw's Speedsafe, not necessarily the same, but that is the type of assist that I'm going to be focusing on in this video. So, assisted opening knives use a spring or torsion bar, which is this piece here. Now, when the knife is fully assembled, this sits into a pocket here, just full of this white lithium grease on the handle, and the other end, this end here, slots into this hole in the blade tang. When the knife is closed, you'll see that the whole spring is in a further back position, and because it is enclosed in its pocket, that means that the spring is under tension when the knife is closed, which causes it to exert a force forwards on the blade. Now that means that once the user gets it past roughly this point here, the blade will start to propel out. Once it gets to around here somewhere, maybe about here, the spring will no longer be having an input on the blade. However, it will have already given the blade enough momentum for the blade to come fully open and lock open. Now, if we look at that process on an assembled knife, we have nothing happening initially. In fact, the blade pulls itself back in to start with. But once we get it past about this point here, the spring will take over and the knife will deploy. So that's how they work on the inside. If we compare that to a manual knife, bring back in the Kershaw Bare Knuckle, there is no assistance of any sort on this knife. Now that means that to deploy the knife, all of the force has to come from your finger and the initial input on the flipper tab. That means it is more possible to miss a flip. I wonder if I can miss a flip on this knife. Yes, I can. Now, a good flipper knife, it should be difficult to miss a flip. It certainly is quite difficult to miss a flip on this knife. But since there is no extra force being added to the blade after this point here, once the flipper tab has disappeared beneath the top of the knife, there's no extra force being added to the blade. So it's very important that the blade is as smooth as possible to preserve as much of the momentum as it can, and therefore make it less likely that the blade will stop before the knife locks open. That is why, while assisted knives like this one tend to be on washers, like this one, and occasionally manual knives are on washers, and sometimes they run very well on washers. This Hinderer XM18 is currently on phosphor bronze washers, and it runs very nicely on them. However, you are more likely to see bearings on a manual action knife, which is the case with this Bare Knuckle, and that is just to preserve more of the momentum and make it more likely that the knife will deploy properly. There's a major difference between assisted and manual action knives in closing. So this Bare Knuckle will drop completely shut with just a little shake like that. And while it's not really important functionally for a manual action knife to be able to drop completely shut like that, it is used as an easy way to show how smooth a knife is. For example, this ZT 0562CF is the smoothest knife I own, and as you can see, the blade just completely falls shut on its own. That's something that's very sought after, but it's something that you cannot get in an assisted opening knife. This Kershaw Knockout will drop to here. After this point, it requires a continuous force to close the knife blade because as you can see the spring is pushing against my fingers. So as you're doing that, you're recompressing the torsion bar inside the knife. If I slide back in the Kershaw Pico here, you're compressing this piece. The torsion bar that I showed you earlier is getting pressed against the back. It's in tension as the knife closes. Now once the knife gets to about this point here, the torsion bar is going to start to push the blade that way. It's going to be allowed to come forward a little bit more and push up the way, which means if I push this torsion bar, it's going to want to pull the blade in, but only for the last little section of closing the knife. And that's what you'll see here. So I'm having to push against it all the way down here, and once it gets relatively close to closed, you'll see it suck itself in. There we go. And all that is what you've just seen here. The torsion bar is getting past roughly this point, and it can start to push forward this way, which is going to pull the blade back in closed. That also works as the detent in these knives. That's the only thing that's keeping the blade closed, since there is no detent hole on any of these Kershaws. In my opinion, one of the biggest drawbacks with assisted opening knives is that the torsion bars can break. I have in fact had that on this knife here. This piece, the torsion bar itself, has already been replaced. And like I say, they can break. Kershaw took care of me eventually. It did take a bit longer because I'm over in the UK. Quite a long time actually, but that's not the point of today's video. It is a very unfortunate thing if your torsion bar breaks when you are out using your assisted opening knife, because in the case of this Knockout, this Kershaw Decimus, the Kershaw Pico, and I believe the vast majority of assisted opening knives, because there is no detent ball hole, there is nothing else to hold the knife closed if the torsion bar goes. The only thing holding this blade closed is the torsion bar. So if that torsion bar breaks, there's nothing holding the blade closed, and you'll essentially have a free swinging blade. It will still lock open, it can still be left locked open, but it won't hold itself closed. And that means that other than treating the knife like a fixed blade, there's no safe way to carry it. And given that if you're out using or carrying your assisted opening folding knife, you probably don't have a sheath ready for it, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a safe way of carrying that knife around for the rest of the day. So yes, a torsion bar failure is, in my opinion, a very bad thing. It makes your knife relatively dangerous, if you're not careful with how you treat it, that is. It can make your knife quite dangerous, and that is absolutely not a good thing, and it is something that you don't get with manual knives. However, it doesn't happen hugely often. I had it happen on the cheapest Kershaw assisted opening knife I have, the Pico that you've seen a few times. I haven't had it happen on this, I haven't had it happen on the Decimus, and I don't think it happens as often as you hear about it happening. In the knife community, you hear about it quite a lot, it's mentioned quite a lot. I think that's more because the people that it has happened to have been in a difficult situation, rather than it necessarily happening a lot. But that is something that you do need to be aware of. Another thing that people worry about with assisted opening knives is, are they going to start opening in your pocket? Now, I've not had that issue with any of the three knives that you've seen here. I don't actually know of anyone who has had that issue directly, and I don't think it is very much of an issue. Any input here, initial input on the flipper tab, is going to bring the blade out a little bit, but it is then going to get pulled back in. It is only with quite a large effort on the flipper tab that you'll get to the point here where the blade starts to push itself out. I think it's very unlikely that that happens in your pocket. Also bear in mind that you can accidentally have a manual action knife start to open itself in your pocket, so I don't think the switch between manual and assisted is something you should really worry about happening in your, really worry about having an assisted opening knife open in your pocket. I don't think that's a concern. Now, unfortunately, spring assisted knives are going to be banned in the UK in early 2021. Wherever you are, it's best that you check the laws before buying anything that might not be legal. So if you're watching this video and thinking you'd like an assisted opening knife, please be careful and make sure that you can own them in your area. Now, in the past, assisted opening knives were a good way of making a knife that deploys well for less money than producing a manual action knife with a good action. A good action on a manual knife is quite a difficult machining thing. You have to be very precise. They have to be usually very good quality knives like this ZT. It tended to be higher end stuff that was manual action knives in the past. However, now we've got companies like CGRB who are making manual action knives which are very smooth, excellent action for quite a small amount of money. And that is where I think the knife world is heading. So many companies now producing these high quality, cheap knives with a good action, or certainly cheaper knives. And as much as I love both of these two, I do think the knife world is moving away from them. Manual knives with good actions are considered more premium, and they're getting made for less and less money all the time. So while I definitely don't think assisted opening knives are going to disappear, or I don't think companies are going to completely stop making them, I do think that we're going to start seeing less of them in the future. I think manual action knives from companies like CGRB, like Civivi, like QSP. My QSP Parrot is a thumb stud knife. Now that I've stiffened up the detent a bit on that, it's still a very good action. So that's where I think the knife world is heading, and those are kind of my thoughts on assisted opening knives. A big deciding factor for me on a specific assisted opening knife is, can I still close it with one hand? In the case of all the ones that you see on the table here, I can. I close it how I would close more or less any other knife. I just have to push it a little harder as I close it. Certainly be done with one hand. You've probably seen me do it with one hand during this video. And while I do prefer manual knives, if I can close an assisted opening knife with one hand, it's not something that bothers me, and it's not something that puts me off buying a knife. Anyway, I think that's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching. Bye.